I don't know if you call it like blank page syndrome or button seat syndrome or something like that, but it's so easy not to be butt in seat working on the thing. And there are so many people who are like, oh, I'm an artist, I'm an animator, I work in this, I work in that. And it's like, well, when was the last time you did that thing? And they're like, oh, well, I've been busy for the last week or so. So I haven't really, it's like they define themselves by the thing. They're frustrated they're not getting better. But when you look at the amount of time they actually spend butt on seat, hands on tools, it's almost like they don't do that thing at all.
Welcome to the GitGud.CG Podcast. My name's Jayden, and this is Kris.
Hi.
This is the podcast where two CG artists document their journey of getting good. Along the way, we're going to be sharing some of our tips and tricks and whatever else so that you can learn from our mistakes and maybe try out some of the things we try. Today, we're going to be talking about how to get in action and how to stay in action.
Yeah. Oh, we had a couple of different ways of talking about this concept. I think that's what makes it a pretty good conversation starter, because we don't really know how to phrase it the way we're thinking of it between the two of us in a way that's like that sort of snappy clickbaity YouTube title,
Yeah,
it's a bit more nuanced than that.
Yeah. Well, so the topic that we were looking at when Kris sent these to me, he had how to get in action, stay in action, or product/deliverables over project. And obviously the first one for me was just like, oh yeah, I get what you're saying there. But the second one, I was like, okay.
And to me, I actually aligned with the first one a bit more as well, but it doesn't really describe it, because in talking about it, we realized that what we're actually looking at is the two different types of motivation in a project. There's your personal motivation in the abstract of the final product, which is you are in action moving towards this meta goal that's, get good, be a good animator,
it's
be a
more
good
ephemeral
texture artist. Yeah. But then there's this deliverable goal that's the thing that sort of got you by the nose, that even when it ceases to be useful to you and ceases to be the shiny thing, takes you through and makes you plant the landing,
Yeah, it's like that deadline, that thing that you have to have and be able to show for, it's the responsibility of having to do the thing. Whereas, as we were talking about some previous podcasts, if you don't have that responsibility to do something, it's easy for scope creep to get you, which we were talking about in our last podcast.
And this really applies to projects you've given yourself when you're trying to practice. Because if you have a deadline from a client, that's that motivation. It's, I don't want to have a bad relationship with this client. I want to do the job well, get paid, move on. That's mostly enough to bring you through to the final part of the project. But we were talking off mic just before the introduction there, and I was saying that in my personal work, I always find that even if I give myself a client, like I imagine myself as a client and give myself a deliverable and a time frame, because to my core I understand that it's not actually real, it ceases to become as strong a motivation. And once I've gotten everything from that process, out of that process that personally I feel like I'm going to get, that's when the shiny wears off. And I actually think it's kind of a good thing, because it's like, then that you've learned everything you're going to learn, and then you can apply it to the next thing. You can iterate fast, like what we were talking about on the Scope Creep podcast. You can iterate faster and apply what you've learned quicker, but what you don't end up with is a good, final, polished result. And for me, product versus project is a way of differentiating the two.
Right, yeah, I see. You've got to have that thing. You got to have that motivation to keep you going, because
I think it is different. I think it is different for everybody. I think it's different motivations, but you do have to have that thing. For me, it is outside accountability. Like, that comes down to that client thing. If I don't have that outside accountability, I don't tend to have that drive to bring it through. And even if I create systems around myself to hold myself in those projects, it's just a bad experience for me because
eventually your brain just starts screaming at you, just, no!
Yeah, it's like, why are you holding our feet to this fire that you lit? I don't understand.
Your brain's just going, wow, please, could you not? So we were talking just before about the 4-day deliverables, right?
Yeah, we went over in the previous podcast that if you iterate quicker, you're able to control that scope creep a little bit more. And all of these things that come along with the shiny wearing off just don't apply to those because you're forcing yourself into a finished state without polish.
Yeah. Which is a little bit... It's got those pros and cons of you get to learn things and iterate on them quicker, but it's like nothing you have is ready to just put out there in the world. But the benefit of that is you've got like all these things and you can kind of just pick the one that you want to, scrub up a little bit.
Mm.
But you've done, or you're coming towards the end of your first 4 days.
Yeah. It's technically...
How'd that go for you?
Yeah, technically a few more than that, but I don't really get to do a lot of CG over the weekend because...
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, 4 days total.
Yeah, of working on it. And I mentioned in the last one that I was doing a freestyle swimming stroke animation loop.
Yeah, you sent me a picture of the character face down in water. I assumed that was your that was your head state at the moment.
Things were not going well, but it turned around in the end, I swear. Though I have to admit, for the animation nerds out there, freestyle swimming has a lot going on. Like, it is... I don't know if that was my best choice for a first, toe in the water, pun intended.
Yeah, look, I think for my first one, I was a bit too rusty with painting rock, and I tried to paint rock/stone, and I was kind of, face down in the water drowning as well. So hopefully you pick something that's a little bit more in the realms of what you better understand. Maybe you could do like twirling a sausage around your fingers. The
thing is that I leave it up to the dice. Yeah, I saw that Valorant gif you sent of the guy with the switchblade, except it was a hot dog. But yeah, no, I leave the selection up to the dice. Like, it's better that way because that way I don't shy away from hard stuff, but I also don't resist going back to the fundamentals. I kind of like it that way.
Well, I mean, it really depends on what you want to get out of it. If you want to learn to do really challenging stuff like that, or if you want to learn more pipeline, then maybe if you want to learn pipeline, then maybe it's easier to go for something you're a little more familiar with temporarily.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, it's all about building visual language. Like, again, as far as process versus project goes, it's more about process and end goal, because if you're going through and your intention is to fill your visual library of things that you sort of know about and that you can sort of get 60% of the way there out of how it feels and your knowledge of momentum and anatomy and that sort of thing, and then use reference to sort of really push it that extra few percent into a more solid grounded animation. It is good to have that variety, which I think sometimes, even if I think that I'm getting enough of that variety, it's always variety within what I would pick, which means that it's probably a bit more comfortable. So I like leaving it up to the dice a little bit. But I guess, that comes down to your preference and process.
Yeah, right. Fair enough. So what motivated you to stay in action over however many days it's been?
Mainly, what motivated me this time around was that I had already put aside the time that I was going to work on it. So even though I was willing to push it out another day or something if I didn't get the amount of time on tools that I needed, I sort of did a very rough sectioning of time where I knew I'd be working on that. I knew exactly what I'd be working on in that time. So it removed a lot of frictional barriers to just keep moving through the project. It's really funny though, because if the end result, like with the showreel project that I was doing, the end result was something pretty. But with these exercises, the end result is finished animation. And so instead of the bones of a very good animation that never gets finished, you end up with a finished animation that's completely kind of balked, but you learned a lot from it.
You learn from it. And so the next time you can apply what you've learned and it gets less balked every single time.
And that's the other thing that keeps me in action, is that knowing that I'm learning something. I do find that if there's something to learn or some knowledge to gain or a skill to acquire, that really takes me through from beginning to end a lot easier than something a bit more intangible like I will be good or I will have done this thing, you know?
It's much easier when there's also a light at the end of the tunnel, and that light at the end of the tunnel is a few days away.
Yeah.
And if you're really feeling burnt, you can just go, look, on that day
Toss and
after,
draw.
I'm just gonna curl up on the couch, watch anime, be a gigantic weeb for 24 hours, and then I'll get back to it.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, I've got probably some sort of non-neurotypical hyper-focus thing that happens where if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it now. But
Yeah.
And that can sometimes get in the way of keeping in motion, because then if I don't have the enormous block of time that would require, it's difficult for me to conceptualize just chipping away at it. That's something it's something that I really struggle with, but I know it's good advice that I've received, is that the people who get the most work out and the people who get to proficiency quicker are the people who just sort of sit down, chip away at it, go have lunch, come back, do a little bit, go, like that. They're capable of sitting down, remembering where they were, doing the next thing, getting distracted and coming back later. Whereas for me, it takes me so long to get into the zone of like both remembering where I was, remembering where I was going, getting into a flow state with the work and feeling like I've actually got like a chunky amount of the work out of the way. And if I can't do that, then sometimes it gets put in the too hard basket and I go move on to something else.
Dude, when I was working in architecture, every single morning, I'd walk into work, sit down, turn on my computer, look at the drawings that I had sitting on my desk and look at the drawings that I had in CAD. And every day it was like half an hour of just puzzling together what the hell I was doing the previous day.
And like all of your undo history's gone as well, so you can't like just check what the last thing you did was.
Yeah, well, unless I felt like leaving my computer on, but probably not the best thing to do.
Yeah, I don't know, but I don't know. I think that is where my ability to improve comes from, is because perfectionism is not a gift, it is a curse. Being a perfectionist is not something to be proud of. And so coming from a place of high perfectionism, my area for growth is being able to break that down into, that the old saying, done is better than good.
Yeah.
But then also being able to break that down into, it's not just worse work, it's work broken up over less ideal times.
Yeah. I think it's better to be more perfectionistic and this is going back a couple of podcasts, if you have climbed and fallen over the other side of Mount Stupid, survived Valley of Despair, and have climbed up whatever that last mountain is, like the point where you are some wise, humble person. That's at the point where you can start to be a bit more of a perfectionist about things, but even then you probably have your limits.
Yeah, like, if anybody ever actually gets there, because I have a suspicion that at the top of that humble slog up to that second peak, I think there's probably a point there where your mindset reverts you back down to the bottom. It's just a little bit higher above sea level than it was last time. Like, the slope is still the same, but you're just a bit higher,
Yeah, probably. I mean, that's why some people, they'll get some power and then, that power's not enough and they'll want more power, getting real.
I don't know. I think
there.
like you say, I think it's usually the humble people who actually get closest to that summit. Anybody who thinks they know what they're talking about probably doesn't.
Wow, you really sound like you know what you're talking about then.
Yeah, I'm a very wise and intelligent person with advice for everybody. Actually, this advice should be applied without any thought to your own individual circumstances because it's universally applicable.
My name is Kris. Everyone listen to me. I am the wise. But no, seriously, that's probably advice to listen to.
You may refer to me as the Great Kaboo. Moving on.
Moving on. So, you think you're going to keep going with these 4-day challenges?
I will at least keep doing it now.
Yeah.
Because it's animation. The one thing that came up for me while I was doing it was that there will be sort of like a pipeline limitation where the quality will only be improved by more time.
Yeah, and it's kind of like, well, this is the pipeline. And then once you get to the point where you go, well, I guess this is pipeline, that's the point where you start focusing on more specific things, you know? And so that's what's happened with me recently. I did about 4, and 3 or 4 projects. And it got to the point where I'm like, okay, this pipeline thing's going all right. But I'm noticing what is now a larger issue because the pipeline issue is less of a problem than other issues that since I want to be a hand-painted, stylized artist, is that, it's been years since I've done this properly, and I haven't really sat down to refresh my hand-painted skills, and damn, it is lacking. And so I've just been really focusing on specific textures. And so at the moment, I've just been doing about 3 or 4 days of just wood. And my brain is full of wood. I've been posting about it on Twitter, so you can just go have a look. On Twitter. And like, I've definitely made improvements, but damn, focusing on that level of niche for something for 3 days, just painting a tileable wood texture for 3 days.
Yeah.
Like, it's not the same texture. I'll do like, one, and then the same day I'll do like another one, and then, I'll do that
and
for
at
3
that
or 4
point,
days.
It comes down to style and artistic choices, which means that there's not going to be any defined end point. There's nothing that signals to you, okay, we're done now. And that's project, right? Because your project is to get better at painting wood textures currently. But you could be doing that ad nauseum from now until the end of your life and still be seeing some micrometer of improvement in the way that you do that. Whereas the product of your 3-day, prop generation process that you're doing, that actually has an output, that is something that you can sort of look at and say, yeah, I'm happy with that.
Yeah, and that's what I'm doing at the moment. I've done a few props, and I did one of them, which was kind of like you can see it on Twitter. It's not finished, but it's close to, and it's just like a stylized sort of fantasy beer mug or stein type thing. And I got some pretty good response from that on Twitter, and I got some good responses on Discord, and I was in, I think it was Hand Painted Guild Discord, and I actually got some really good feedback on how to improve it. And so I kind of thought, look, I've been spending days painting wood, so maybe I should put what I've learnt on wood to practice and fix the wood issues, because the feedback that I got was the metal looks good, just a little bit more with the metal, but the relighting needs to happen. Sorry?
Feedback and accountability, because if you're just running that cycle of trying to improve through a process and a project, you're not setting something out that you're like that. That whole artist thing where they post something on social media and they're like, just spent my lunch break doing this like full 3D character in ZBrush with hand painted textures and yada yada. And you're like, yeah, okay, over your lunch break, I believe you.
Yeah.
But what they're doing is they're turning it into a project rather than a product. They're not presenting it as, this is what I did with what I had available. Take it as it is. They're saying, oh, don't judge this too harshly because it's not finished. This is not the product. And if you've got in your head, this is the product, and you take that to your, the Discord servers and Twitter and all that sort of stuff. Once that's up there and you say, warts and all, this is what I accomplished with the limitations that I had, and then say, I am open to feedback, you can take that feedback more gracefully, because at the end of the day, what you showed is what you showed.
People are more likely to interact.
Yeah, and it does make people more likely to interact, but it's also like, you don't take that feedback so personally, because you don't feel the need to be like, oh, it's not finished, or oh, I only had 20 minutes, or oh,
Yeah. And so I think that's really the great thing about the, 3 dailies for me, or the 4 dailies for you, where you can pump something out and then you've got a handful of them there and you can sort of see, okay, I like this one. I might go with this one. I'll post this one on social media and Discord, whatever, get some feedback on it.
Yeah. And that's the thing. That's really important, because you can make the choice to be like, this is the product. I'm not going to share that because I know it could be better. And I don't need people, pointing that out.
Yeah. And so if you can share that thing where it's kind of towards the end, it's something that's like, it's not finished. It's almost at the polished stage. And it's the point where it's like, this is when you get feedback. That's a really good point to share. And then once you've shared it, you've got all this feedback from people, and that's a bit of motivation to stay in action and actually finish that.
A couple of quick wins just interspersed. The problem that I find, though, is that if you do have something that is a longer project where the product will sort of be defined by the process itself, whereas you've got a kind of vague idea of what you want it to look like in the end, but until the process is sort of in process, you don't really know exactly what the limitations of that are going to be. Yeah. That's when you sort of get a bit lost and a bit muddy, because you're not saying, I have 4 days, I'm pumping out an animation, it'll be about this, or hand-painted texture, or what have you. You're saying, I have an idea for something that I think will be pretty cool. I've buttoned it down as much as I can, but there are so many unknowns in that process at that point. I think, for me, what keeps you in action on those longer projects, once you actually get there, is having an idea of what the product is at the end. Because if you don't sort of have a visualization of what you want that to be, you're not making choices within the context of what will get you there. And if you're not making choices inside the context of what will get you there, you're just making choices, and then you have to back up a lot more, and you get very confused and depressed.
Yeah. I get that a lot, where if you don't have that really clearly defined, you're just in that muddy middle where you're just in this whirlpool of just going back and forth, like, oh, over here, over there, I've made this decision and that decision undoes 30 other decisions. Yeah. It's just so much clearer.
The way I think about it is actually zooming in and out on the graph editor. I'm going to abstract this a little bit because I know that's not a universal experience. But there was a Photoshop technique for painting when the tools weren't as good, where you'd start on the thumbnail at a particular pixel resolution, and then you'd slowly bring the canvas size up and up and up and up, and fill in the detail as more pixels became available.
Right.
It's sort of like that. It's like fractal rather than additive. Yeah. You're not adding it onto the end. You're just zooming out and then filling in detail as a level of detail becomes available.
Yeah, well, that's what I've been doing in my wood painting is I will zoom out, because I have this really bad habit of being super zoomed in, even when I'm putting in big sort of shapes where I shouldn't be zoomed in. Yeah. So I've been making a conscious effort to zoom out on these sorts of things, and then making these larger gestural decisions and then slowly getting a bit closer.
Yeah, and the restrictions of those detail levels, for instance, like if you were working on 512 by 512 pixels, each of those pixels is more important. And so if you're defining, larger groups of shapes, you need to be pretty pixel perfect on that, but you're still at a 512 by 512. So there's a certain level of detail that you can get to before it becomes unavailable. And then once you've made that the best you can do at that size, turning it into 1024 by 1024 gives you twice as much detail now, but you've got the basis of what you started on.
Yeah.
And I think that's how I see keeping moving towards a product rather than in a project. Because I think a project, you initiate and move forward within it, and it's like a road and you're making decisions left or right, I think
right.
if you've got a product at the end, it sort of slowly phases in from, like when you have the Gaussian blur slider right up and it's all washed out and you bring it down slowly and the picture just sort of slowly just forms into view and then all of a sudden you've got the final thing when there's at zero.
Yeah.
That's sort of how I feel I need to make projects in order to make progress.
Yeah, right. You got to bring that Gaussian blur down just slowly.
Mental blur.
Into focus. Yeah. Something I found with this whole exercise thing that we've been doing lately through doing the pipeline is removing friction, identifying friction in your pipeline and making sure that you remove it and that you're not kind of tying your hand behind your back for whatever's sake, right?
Right. Is that a knowledge-based thing, or is that like a procedural goof? Like, is there a difference between not knowing what's happening there and defining that, or is it like you've made a bad decision and you've just been sort of working around it?
This was me biting a bullet. So on the first couple of ones, first 2 or 3, I'm doing my textures in Photoshop, and that means if I want to do any 3D painting, then I have to do it in Blender on like I have to get like a node and then, do the paintings and export it and put it into Photoshop and then, just keep doing that, or I have to use Blender's convoluted sort of node set up to do texture painting, which is just like, I would rather just jump off my balcony right now. But I bit the bullet. Good old
Blender.
I bit the bullet. I bought 3D Coat Textura.
Yeah.
Which I know you were pushing me to do it, and I finally just did it. And it's just one of those things where
there is no greater feeling than having consistent access to your tool of choice and knowing it's there when you need it, rather than having to make that decision in the moment.
Yeah, and it's just like it's a much more. There's things I don't like about it, like the navigation is the main thing that irks me, but that's just something I'll deal with eventually. But it's something where the interaction between painting in 3D and Photoshop, that link is just so buttery smooth and seamless and works every single time. And it's just like, oh, you've got your layers in 3D Coat and you've got your layers in Photoshop. They're exactly the same. They work the same, except 3D Coat doesn't have masks. 3D Coat, but
3D Coat doesn't have masks.
Well, at least in layer painting, I assume it does for a procedural.
Are you sure?
Yeah, no, it doesn't.
That's crazy.
Yeah, I know.
Are you sure it's not one of the things they maybe stripped out for the Textura version?
No. Even my teacher from CGMA was like, yeah, no, I use masks in Photoshop, but I have to apply them before I go back into 3D Coat because 3D Coat doesn't support Photoshop's masking.
That's loony pants.
Which is a big pain in the butt, but besides that, and besides some like navigational things in 3D Coat, it's just such a nice, seamless transition or change or upgrade. I don't know how I put it, but it's something that works, Like, I was sick. What I was really sick of with Blender is being like, okay, so is it best to just paint everything in Photoshop and then kind of just like, draw a line, save it? How's that seam looking? No, not good enough. Control Z. Or do I import the PSD and then do I mix a new node over the top? And I paint on that new node over the top, and then I export that out, and then I place that into Photoshop? And then when I place it into Photoshop, do I place it as linked or do I place it as embedded? What's the best way to go there? But in 3D code, it's like, nah, man. It's the same. It's the same file. Same file working across two programs. And it's just...
if you abstract it a little bit, I think it is friction reduction, but I think it has more to do with trusting the tool. Here's a bit of like a lateral example that sort of is just how my brain works. We were mountain biking the other day, with masks on, obviously. But we were coming down this big hill, and so we decided to end up going around it. And then I realized that even I, somebody who has done a bit of mountain biking, was not comfortable going down this very easy incline because, and here's the kicker, the tool that I was using was a Kmart bike that we bought here when we moved here because I had to leave my actual mountain bike back where I moved from.
Right.
And so I didn't trust the tool to take me down that hill safely. And that was an interesting revelation for me because it really forced home the idea that if you're not confident with what you're using to get that product, to get that result, you do try to hedge, you do try to come up with ways around it, and you do try to figure out ways to do it that don't put you in danger of the tool failing and it being catastrophic.
Yeah, and in a lot of instances, it's don't use that tool.
Yeah, and finding the tools that you can trust to do a thing, I think that's important because, for instance, like people do things in ZBrush that I think is crazy. Like they'll use the posing tools and they'll work around the edges of all this stuff just to get a different result. In Maya, if you knew what you were doing, you could do in half the time, right? And it would be less destructive, and there's a workflow there that I think is better. The thing is that these people, if they're doing that, they don't trust their skills in Maya. They don't trust Maya to get that result. They are ZBrush fluent. So they know how to get there, even if it's a little bit fiddly. They stay in motion and they get the result that they want. And they know that what they'll end up with is good enough for them without having to go and learn another tool. And so they trust ZBrush to get them there. And it would take them a lot longer to get confident in Maya. And I think tool friction is one of these big things that keeps you in motion in a project. And it's one of those things that comes with experience, right? You have to have used it enough to trust it.
Yeah. Some people just, they'll use Blender for 32 years or ZBrush, whatever it is, and you get so comfortable in your little software ecosystem that it's just hard to move on.
It's hard to move on, and that's how I always thought about it. I always said, they are limiting themselves because it could be so much easier if they spent a weekend to learn this. Yeah. But as I'm going through this process, I'm realizing that those are the people who are always going to be ahead of you just in like art creation and career-wise because they accept where they're at and know what they're working on. It's not worthwhile to them to move on to these other tools just because they're available.
Yeah, that's how I feel with geometry nodes.
Yeah.
I think geometry nodes are really cool, and I can't wait to see what people do with it, but it's like, I know we talked about this, like, I think the last one or two podcasts, but I look at it, I'm like, I mean, it's cool, but I don't have any, like, use for it specifically. Maybe I do, but, I'm just kind of accepting that I've got a goal, and I don't want that goal to get pushed back with me going, ooh, I'm going to do Andrew Price's geometry node.
And that's the new and shiny, right?
Yeah.
Let's punch your Andrew Price card for the episode.
Yeah. Yeah. Or there's Arendelle, who does some pretty cool stuff as well. He's got like crazy amount of content on just generally Blender nodes, but also, geometry nodes as well. They are very far ahead in that sort of field.
Speaking of Blender influences, just to circle back to Mr. Price for a moment, he put up a podcast earlier last week talking about it. He was answering a couple of different questions. I don't usually listen to his stuff, but this sort of just came up in my feed and had it on in the background while I was doing the dishes. And something that he brought up was kind of interesting, and I think it applies to this topic, where it's like, in motion, you will always get more done. And it's crazy how easy it is to want to be the thing, but not be doing the thing.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if you call it like blank page syndrome or button seat syndrome or something like that, but it's so easy not to be butt in seat working on the thing. And there are so many people who are like, oh, I'm an artist, I'm an animator, I work in this, I work in that. And it's like, well, when was the last time you did that thing? And they're like, oh, well, I've been busy for the last week or so. So I haven't really, It's like they define themselves by the thing. They're frustrated they're not getting better. But when you look at the amount of time they actually spend butt on seat, hands on tools, it's almost like they don't do that thing at all.
Oh, yeah, I know a lot of people like that. And some are in the CG art space, and I've been guilty of doing this as well. It's like, yeah,
I've been there as well. Like, it's not like a thing that defines you as a character, right? It's like it's a mode you can get into very easily.
Yeah, and when we were studying together, there was the art course, and then there was the programming course. And every single person that was like in our class, like, yeah, I'm an artist. We're like, this is the first day of our class. I've never touched this software before, but I'm an artist.
Yeah. Whereas the programmers were just like, oh yeah, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm here to learn programming.
Yeah. I don't know. I always found that kind of funny, and I was also guilty of that. But
it's because there's no definite answer, and it's very ephemeral. So if you feel arty, you're an artist. Yeah,
maybe that's it. That reminds me of a speech that Andrew Price did years ago. I think it was at the Blender conference, and I think
say what you will. He's consistent.
Yeah, it was about productivity or something like that, and he talks about how people get things done and how people be productive. And I think one of them, he was talking about J.K. Rowling, which is somewhat controversial now, but the way she wrote Harry Potter was, even though she was a single mum with, I think, like 2 kids or something, she wrote that by taking any amount of time she had in the day. If she only had 5 minutes while the kids were doing whatever to write something down for Harry Potter, she'd do that. It was just this constant attempt to stay in motion. Here's an opportunity to put myself in motion. Let's do it.
Yeah,
and that's how she wrote most of the first 1 or 2 Harry Potter books.
Here in Melbourne, they've converted one of the old jails into what they call writers' cells, and you can hire them out on an hourly basis. And you can go there as a writer with your laptop. I think there's no internet, but there is power. And you just go in there and you lock yourself in an old jail cell. And the idea is that you're like locked off from distractions and you just sit down and write. And because
that is the most Melbourne thing ever.
Because you're in that setting, like I think they preference like crime writers and stuff like that because they want it to be thematic.
Do you have to prove that you're a writer? Can we just rock up there as artists and sit in an old jail cell?
Yeah, it was on the Creative Spaces website, so I'm pretty sure anybody could just like roll in there and say, yes, I'm working on a book for CG animation, so I need to do a bit of research.
Yeah, I'm just gonna, and then you pull out your Wacom tablet and start painting.
It's really in-depth research.
Yeah, it's really in depth. I've really got to practice myself with the CG artist that is trapped in the prison of CG art, Or maybe you could say, oh yes, I'm just I prefer to handwrite it, but I don't want to write it in a book. I want to write it.
That's what's so funny about that Creative Spaces website. It's like at one stage you'll have writer cells, and it's all about like getting into the vibe and really experiencing it from a first person perspective. And then the next one's like, got room, might be soundproof, $200 a week.
Wait, so writers actually need that, where what they just need a writer space to get all that work done?
It's about sitting down, getting the button in the chair, and then just banging your head away at it until it's done.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of procrastination. Like, I know that firsthand. Like, just the friction to just sit in the seat and do the thing once you understand it. Like, that's the thing. The way I approach CG tends to be more of that sort of model. Because, like, a writer, if he's not a pantser, which is what they call the people who just, like, sit down and write, which they'll have to do that anyway because they'll have to be button seat. But if they do an outline, if they're an outliner, they know sort of, like, what the story is and where it's going before they sit down to type it out. And so when they sit down to type it out, it's pretty much all those creative decisions and questions have been answered. They just need to get it done. And a lot of the time, that's where you fall down. And that's sort of how I approach CG projects. And that's exactly where I tend to fall down as well.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's where everyone falls down. You get this grand idea in your head or this outline or whatever. Then you sit down to do the thing. And then you expect to sit down and execute for 6 hours straight. And then next minute, you're half an hour through. And you're like, oh, yeah. Well, I deleted the default cube.
And then rotated around in 3D space for 30 minutes.
So I reckon, look, it's a start. It's definitely a way to go. You know what? I think I've deserved a break. I think I might go play some video games now. With all this hard work, it was
I've been
really
working
difficult.
really hard. I showed up, and at the end of the day, isn't that what matters?
I showed up. I deleted the cube. I rotated it around. I put in another cube.
Did you ever see that animation that was going around where somebody like screen kept deleting the default cube, and then it cuts away, and there's like a portal that opens and it dumps it into this liminal space where all the default cubes go, and you delete them?
Yeah, I saw that.
It's funny.
When I started using Blender, I didn't get the meme, but I went on CG Cookie, and I think it was like an ArcViz or like an interior tutorial or something like that. And at the start of the tutorial, the instructor was like, "Okay, cool. So here's the default cube. Yep, just delete that." They said it, straight face, no. Well, I assume straight face and no joking in their voice. Yep, delete. Okay, cool. Now insert a plane. All right, go into edit mode and extrude the plane up by 2 meters.
Into a cube. Yeah.
And it wasn't until
as is tradition.
It wasn't until like years later I was like, hold on, I see what you did there.
But circling back around to the topic, a book that I've brought up a lot on this podcast, I think already, because I just quote it a lot. Like this isn't podcast. This is just me in general. If anybody brings this stuff up to me. Deep Work by Cal Newport. He has 3 ways that you get work done. You've got the people who need that big block of time where they cut themselves off from everything and then they sit down and they do it till it's done. You've got the scheduled time people who have to like schedule smaller blocks of time here and there and sort of stay accountable to that. And then the third one, which he associated with himself as well as a lot of other sort of motivational writers, is that you just clip minutes here and there, like between saying, "Oh, I'm just going to the bathroom," and coming back to the party, you sit down and write a paragraph.
Yeah, right. So you just go to the bathroom. Oh, I've got a quick minute on my phone.
Yeah.
Write it out in the toilet.
You're running out to the sports ball game that you always go to on a Friday, but your wife has to change her dress, so you've got 30 to 2 hours to get something down, that sort of thing.
Yeah, right. So like any window of opportunity you have, do the thing you have to do. Yeah.
And so it's, I think that, like I said at the beginning, I think that's where I'm headed in my thinking about keeping in motion. It's the ability to start up quicker, because I think it was 20 minutes that I read was the time it takes the human brain to get focused. And I think that's what's happening. I think when I sit down for a big lot of work, an hour or more, it's taking me that 20 minutes to get into focus. And then because of that 20 minutes where I'm trying to get into focus, that's a lot of time to have thoughts to get distracted, which restarts the 20 minutes, Yeah. I think you're being held in that liminal space. And I think by just chipping away at it, you don't have the luxury of even being focused. You have to know where you're going, you have to know where you are, and you have to know where you're going next so that you can clip off those little things around the edges. and sort of slowly work towards it that way.
Yeah. And I know that was just really, specific about writers, and, artists can have their own sort of interpretation of that. But it is more difficult for us in a sense where, we want to do that, where it's just like any moment we get. But it's like, well, first you got to turn on a computer, fire up, Maya or whatever, and, Maya 32 years later, plug in, your Wacom or whatever the hell you're doing. And then by the time you've got ready to go, it's like, oh, my window of opportunity is gone now.
Yeah.
Or it's like halfway gone.
I have definitely been struggling with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I have one graphics PC. I have a laptop, I have a Mac Mini, and I have a graphics PC.
Yes.
I can't do my CG work on any other computer other than my graphics PC because it just requires that level of oomph to run everything.
Yeah.
That becomes a problem, especially when I don't want to be in this space, but I want to get some work done. Or if I wanted to just quickly get something done, I have to wait for it to start up. It doesn't take that long these days because it's got fast start and everything, but it's still frictional. It's a barrier, so I leave it running, and that's never good for the computer and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, that's a good way to kill your computer.
When I'm in a project, I tend to leave it on longer than is smart. But I trust my components. I'm a PC builder. You can trust me.
Yeah, look, I bought my desktop, my power PC from Aldi, a supermarket. And look, this thing is basically... You're
really giving us some credentials as people to talk with authority on CG here.
Look, my computer, I got it in 2016. And, for the most part, but if I'm not at work, basically, which is, we're in lockdown at the moment, so no, not at work. But basically, if I'm not at work, like if I'm at home, the computer is on as long as I'm awake. It has the same waking hours as I do.
And it's like 50-50 chance that it gets turned off in the evening.
Oh no, it gets turned off every evening. So, old Sally gets that much love at least.
Right. Come on, Bessie.
Yeah, so, I don't know. I'm kind of just sitting there being like, don't die on me, baby. It's like a 5-year-old desktop now. So yeah, it's a 1070. It's alright. Like, it's not like, oh my god, but it's pretty good entry for like most games. And so, I just have to fight off the urge to buy a new computer every time I, see something like, ooh, new Ryzen processor or new RTX, whatever. I'm like, ooh, I could buy that.
Well, that was actually something that Mr. Price also brought up in that podcast that I was talking about. He said that, if you're going to do CG, you're going to do CG even on the trash that you have. But that really is a Blender perspective. Because even if I had another beefy laptop that I could take with me and just chip away at this stuff, I wouldn't have my mail license. It's not floating. I have to disconnect it, unassociate the ID of my particular computer, and then I'd have to reinstall it on the laptop every time I wanted to move it.
Love some Blender.
Yeah, I'm not going to pay...
Suck shit.
I'm not going to pay however much just to get back to that point where I can just use it again. I mean, the benefit of the current situation that I'm in is that I'm about to start up this animation course, and you get 3 months worth of Maya on a student license. So I could actually do that. I'm considering sticking a version of it onto my laptop, but I don't know. Like, CG artists, I think, do have that limitation. You are correct, which means that I think you do have to be a bit more deliberate about your butt on seat times.
Yeah, I think in 2018 I bought a gaming laptop, and it's like a Metabox. So it's this Australian company where they get these laptops built in Taiwan, and like it's just like this sort of random laptop, and then basically the company brings it over, and then they put it with their own sort of little flavor in the OS, and it'll say Metabox when it starts up. And then they'll put their little branding on it. And that's pretty much it. there's a whole bunch of companies all around the world that have these laptops. They're exactly the same laptops.
Yeah.
They might have slight configuration differences, but they're all got different branding on them, and they're all technically different laptops, but they're all actually identical. And so anyway, cheap as chips, eh? So I bought one of those laptops, and you can tell it's cheap, but she'll be right. And so I got that as a secondary computer so that when we're not in lockdown, I can go out, I can go to my girlfriend's place, and, she does a bit of painting and a bit of digital painting as well. So we can go over there and sort of be in each other's presence and do that, or I'll do a bit of work at a cafe. The original intent was actually to get a hot desk.
And also a backup background on the pod before.
Yeah. But also in case my computer bricks itself.
That's the other thing. I am terrified that one of my components will die because at the moment postage is terrible. Like if I ordered something today, I wouldn't get it for like 2 or 3 weeks.
Jesus.
And yeah, it's just the situation we're in at the moment. But I don't actually have another graphics capable PC with me. I've got another one left that I took to my parents' house before I moved. So I've got one sitting there, but I can't get access to that. I'd have to get it freighted or something. But I don't know, I'd either have to do that or I'd have to see what a Mac Mini's made of,
All right, Mac Mini, let's see what you're made of.
Ring! That thing gets hot, man. It's not one of the new M1 ones. It's like the old Intel chips.
Right.
I swear I could cook chips on top of that.
Yeah, I mean, your coffee would never go cold.
Yeah, I've never actually thought of that. That's a good idea.
Yeah. Coffee warmer. Man, that's the way to go. But yeah, I do sleep a little bit easier knowing that, well, if my desktop shits itself, that's okay because I've got a laptop and I use Dropbox and everything is synchronized.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, and I think if you don't have that ability to go out and become more mobile with the way that you're working, chipping away at the actual projects, I think in order to be in that mindset, you have to take it back out to that meta context and be like, okay, I can't move keys around in Maya. I can't physically do that, but what I can do is, I can plan my constraints and my selection sets because I know what controls the rig has, so I could just do that in a Word doc, right? Or you can chip around the edges. You can do some thumbnails. You can do whatever it is. As an animator, you're always looking at the way things move and the way people move. You're trying to feed your visual library, and if you're doing that actively, you're technically working on it because it will be easier when you go back to it. But I do acknowledge there is a real difference between butt in seat work versus becoming a better artist. Yeah,
actually, something I did last night where I was slowing down a little bit, but I had this thought where I'm like, oh, actually, I just had a revelation of how to do these wood textures. And so I wrote it down, sort of blocking it out in stages of basic shapes, preliminary sort of detail, and then, more detail and polish or whatever it was. And I wrote it down in steps where it's I wasn't working on the texture, but I just wrote something out. I just wrote out a sort of set of instructions of how I can
make sure that when you're painting this, the highlight is at this direction using this sort of tool here at this time to make sure this doesn't happen.
Not even necessarily that. It's just the sequence of things starting with you draw the shapes of the planks, and then you do this, and then you do that, and then you start to put this in until you eventually get to polish, right?
Yeah.
And so that's something I realized last night. That's a good way of staying in motion.
In the work. Yeah.
Yes, keeping your productivity in motion.
Because that's going to be my next point, is that even though you can't take your work with you, if there is anything that is not being done inside the software that holds you in that location on that PC, if there's anything like that left that you're not doing in those moments that you could be doing, it hasn't become a problem yet because you could have been working on those things.
Yeah.
So you could, if you're doing your planning or you're doing formats like you're doing it. I could draw thumbnails. I could like break down the dialogue into syllables and write down ideas. Like anything that's not utilizing that computer power that you need, if that still exists, then it hasn't become a problem yet.
And you can find all sorts of ways to stay in motion while not being at the computer as well. Such as, writing down, okay, yeah, I'll, do some thumbnails, or maybe my next animation will be this, I don't know, walk cycle, and, you could sort of scamp out some, rough ideas or poses for, this new animation, or, say you were reflecting back on, this is what I was doing, I was reflecting back on what I had been doing that day. And I kind of thought, yeah, I did this, and then I did that, and I did that. And I realized, I identified that, oh, those are actually stages. And I'm going to forget that if I don't write it down. And so I wrote it down. And like that is probably one of the most important things I did in that whole project, because I can have that texture and I can have that file and I can look back at it. But I've also written an instruction manual. And since I wrote it, I know that I'm going to understand it because it's my own words. At least, hopefully, I'm that literate. But
so am I to understand that you've come around on writing down your processes?
Hey, I have always believed that you should write down a process. I just don't believe it doesn't exist if you don't do it.
Okay. I will just let the listeners make their own decision as to whether or not that represents a concession on your part to the most contentious thing that's ever happened on this podcast.
Oh yeah, absolute fire. Go back and watch it. While you're there, like, comment, and subscribe, please.
Yes, and please leave a comment on this podcast as well, because we're really happy to answer your questions and address anything else that you'd like us to talk about.
Yeah, we've also got an email, krisandjayden@gmail.com. So you can send it in there, or you can leave a comment. We do prefer comments, but whichever really. You can also reach us on social media. Were we wrapping this up now, Kris? Side note?
Yeah, we might as well hit the bricks on this one, because I think we did start to circle around the same point there, but I think that just lets us know how important it really is. And I think that's new information for us, which is probably why we spent a bit of time there.
Yeah.
I mean, we came into this podcast saying that we didn't really have a defined idea of what moving forward in a project looked like, and like how we could sort of have a quippy sort of wrap up sort of summary of what that looked like. And I think that A, became clear, and B, I think regardless of if the terminology has become clear, I think we really did sort of parcel out the difference between keeping in motion versus following a process.
Yes. We particularly, towards the end there, really did talk quite a bit about stay in action, which it's something I haven't put enough thought into. I kind of think about it here and there, but it's not something I put enough conscious effort into. And I think it was quite valuable for us to really hit that at the end there.
Yeah, hopefully people listening got something out of that as well, because I can never tell with these more like ephemeral concept ones when it's more about stepping back and looking at the work of the work, whether or not that's only valuable to the people talking about it in the positions they're in, or whether that has some more tertiary benefit. So it would be nice to hear from you guys about that. We can hit some more actual content topics, or we can sort of do more of this sort of stuff as we go, and we'll just moderate that depending on what everybody prefers. Speaking of getting into action and staying in action, the premiere of the sort of YouTube content that I mentioned that I was going to be doing for Third Draw 3D last week, that's going to be a little bit longer in the making. I'll keep everybody informed. It is still coming. It's just that I realized that the microphone that I'm talking on right now, it sounds great after I've done some stuff to it. But as far as live streaming anything goes, it's a bit trash. So I've got another one coming in the post. And as aforementioned, that's going to take a little bit. And then after that, I'm going to start uploading both pre-recorded content to the Third Draw 3D YouTube channel, as well as I'm going to try and do some streaming. I've been having all kinds of fun putting together the overlays and thumbnails and stuff. I'm pretty excited for how that's going to go. The channel is live if you wanted to go over there and just, subscribe to be notified when it goes actually live, if you're interested. But that won't probably start for another week or a week and a half until I get that new microphone.
Exciting. So what is that YouTube channel called again?
Third Draw 3D.
Third Draw 3D. And where can they find you on Twitter?
At Animator Kris anywhere on the internet.
You can find me at Twitter at JSTO_art. I don't know. I should remember this by now. Link's in the bio. See ya.
Bye. Having really beautiful shots, if I know that I got out of that, like, now I know what not to do, that's enough for me, which is why I have a lot of trouble sitting down being like, okay, I'm gonna make a perfect shot, because I always hit this point where it's like, I have learned enough from this now. Drops toy.
Hang on. Weren't you just saying that the motivation for a project for you is to have a product/deliverable, not necessarily in the sales sense?
The motivation
and now I'm good
to take it through to completion. I think that's a necessary differentiating factor, because if I'm just doing it for practice, that's why I had so much trouble with the showreel that I was like putting together from my practice, because it's like when I practice something, I get better at it, then I want to apply it to something new.
Yeah, okay.
But then the showreel says, yes, but it also has to be, pretty. Okay, I'm going to think about this. Just hold that thought. Okay, go.
What was that?
My mic was freaking out again, so I had to hit it.
Okay, alright.